Good afternoon. My name is Nicholas Bailey, and I am a senior at Delta State University, and I am doing the capstone project on how to prevent human trafficking in Mississippi. And I have a special guest here with me today.
Hi, my name is Molly Blythe, and I'm a special agent with the FBI. I work in Jackson, Mississippi, and I primarily focus on crimes against children, child exploitation, and human trafficking.
So, I have a few questions for you today. Um, but my first question is, what exactly is human trafficking?
Okay, so human trafficking is the process of recruiting or harboring or moving or obtaining a person by means of forced fraud or coercion for the purpose of either involuntary servitude or a commercial sex act. Now, a couple of caveats. If a person's under the age of 18, you don't have to have forced fraud or coercion. Just the forced labor or the forced sex act in exchange for something of value is enough to be human trafficking. And a commercial sex act is the exchange of anything of value. Doesn't have to be money. It can be, clothing. It can be food. It can be transportation. Anything that's valuable to that person in exchange for sexual activity.
Okay. What are the types of human trafficking?
So those two broad categories, the involuntary servitude, which is our labor trafficking, and then there's our sex trafficking. Within sex trafficking, you can break it down further where you have the trafficking of a minor versus the trafficking of an adult, or different types based on who is the person in charge. So sometimes that's a family member, sometimes that is gang related, sometimes that is pimp controlled. These would be further ways of breaking down. But basically, it's the two categories, labor versus sex trafficking.
Okay. What are some signs that people in the community can look at and show that it's human trafficking going on?
So if you see someone who has a large amount of cash on them, multiple cell phones, hotel keys, especially if it's a juvenile that is walking around an area with hotel keys, maybe a history of running away, false identification, somebody who may lie about their age or isn't very familiar with their surroundings. Maybe they don't know the area very well. Signs of physical abuse, bruises, scarring, sometimes can be an indicator of trafficking. Sexually transmitted diseases, especially in juveniles. Markings or tattoos that would be affiliated with a particular person also can be an indicator. Those are the main high points.
Okay. What are ways to prevent or lower the risk of human trafficking?
So for the FBI, and this may jump ahead to another question, but for us, we really focus on being a victim-centered approach, taking a victim-centered approach to trafficking, meaning that we don't treat the victims like they have done something wrong. We realize that this has a heavy traumatic effect on the victims, and they're not often looking for help. They have ended up in a situation that is about survival. So we try to provide services. Our victim services side of the house offers counseling, lawyers, different things to help with that. We also work with our state and local partners to do outreach, to do education campaigns, and to let the general public know what to look for and how to be active in their communities.
Okay. What do victims look like?
So that's a good question because people think that they will be able to see a victim and know that this is somebody who has been trafficked, but victims can look like anyone. Anybody could be trafficked who has a vulnerability or is accessible to a trafficker. Somebody who is suffering from poor hygiene or doesn't have necessities or lacks transportation, or maybe they have a learning disability, or maybe they're just naive, their parents haven't educated them. These things that make you vulnerable to a stranger coming into your life can lead down the road to trafficking. And in the same way, if a child is more accessible to someone who traffics, like the kid who needs transportation or the young person who needs transportation, then there's also that likelihood. So I wouldn't say that necessarily you can say what a victim of trafficking looks like.
Okay. What do traffickers look like?
Same thing. So we have that stereotype in our heads where you think, a pimp looks like a pimp. And sure, there are some out there that fall into that stereotype, but that's not always the way. Sometimes it's a dad or an uncle. Sometimes it's a woman. Sometimes it is more of that stereotypical pimp, but it is somebody who controls their victims, grooms them to do what they want. Sometimes they're the person holding all the money or holding the phone or the identifications hostage to get the victims to do things.
Okay. Can you share with me some statistics on human trafficking in Mississippi?
Sure. So I'll go broad first. I'll say in 2022, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children had more than 19,000 reports of child sex trafficking in all 50 states. This included every type of community, city, small towns, tribal land. That's a pretty large number for 1 year, and that's just of kids. That's not even talking about the labor trafficking. That's not even talking about the trafficking of adults for the sex trade. So it's a pretty big problem. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children, they have a website that's missingkids.org. They put out a wonderful set of resources for people who want to know more about this topic or need help. This is a good site to go to. If I bring it down more specifically to Mississippi, the National Human Trafficking Hotline had more than 500 reports of human trafficking in Mississippi in 2021. Nearly 100 of those were received from victims or survivors of human trafficking. The hotline receives tips about sex trafficking and labor trafficking, and approximately 230 criminal cases were identified, and the majority of those were sex trafficking cases. So in those numbers, it's both kinds, but when you look at the breakdown, there's definitely more reports of the sex trafficking than the labor trafficking here in our state.
Okay. Well, my final question is basically like, do you think preventing human trafficking in Mississippi is like, can we decrease it? Like,
I think it can be decreased. I think that it is important to learn what prevents a victim from seeking help. The fact that they're not only afraid of being retaliated against, they're afraid of law enforcement. They have a fear of the unknown, of being able to take care of themselves. Understanding what those hurdles are so that as a community, different people can play a role in making them less afraid. And then as a society, if we work to help our kids when they're in school, learn how to join the workforce, and whether that is going out and getting a job or going to college or whatever that next step is, keeping an eye that they're not being preyed upon, because the predators are out there. And it's up to us as a community to keep them from winning. So I do think it's possible to bring the statistics down.
okay. Well, thank you, Special Agent Blythe, for your time. I think that's the end of this interview.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick.